At her company's holiday gathering in front of 200 people, she dismissed my touch and asserted I was giving off an unavailable impression. I didn't respond or create a fuss. Instead, I stride purposefully towards her superior, a man enjoying merriment with his colleagues as if they were his domain, and silently slipped my wedding ring into his hand. He glanced at it, then fixed his gaze on her, and the smile vanished from his face. "You must depart from this table immediately," he said, but he wasn't addressing me. "I am Alden Reyes, age 41, and 6 months ago I would have assured you my marriage was robust." The events at Wraith Hollow Country Club that cold December evening didn't merely destroy my marriage. They unearthed something that had been decaying beneath the surface for 2 years, and as the night progressed, it wasn't just my wife who found her world crumbling apart. Without delving into the events at the party, which take a dark turn beyond a simple shove, I urge you to subscribe so you don't miss the twist this tale takes. Comment if you've ever spotted a lie in an instant by reading someone's facial expression. Like the video if you've reached this point. It encourages me to continue sharing these narratives. Let's rewind to the beginning. I encountered Cressida Marlowe 9 years ago at a charity event in downtown Chicago, when my architecture firm was still based above a dry cleaner on Halsted Street. She stood out in a room full of people, with an edge that made most others feel uneasy. This edge came from her relentless pursuit through the finance industry, which initially didn't welcome her presence. Raised in the outskirts of Cleveland, daughter of a machinist and a school cafeteria worker, she constantly reminded others of her journey. I appreciated this about her for many years. We exchanged vows in a modest ceremony at a vineyard in Door County, Wisconsin, inviting only 60 guests, as Cressida preferred a genuine occasion over spectacle. She wanted authenticity, as she expressed to me. On that day, standing in her altered wedding dress, her mother had modified it due to financial constraints instead of professional alterations. In that moment, I believed I'd found someone who grasped the essence of value. For 4 years, this held true. I expanded my business from employing 3 people to a team of 22. Simultaneously, Cressida ascended from an analyst role at Haverson Bregman Capital to senior associate, then vice president. We rejoiced in every promotion together. I recall her genuinely crying tears when she became VP, sharing with me that she never imagined a girl from her neighborhood would occupy a seat in such a boardroom. That night, I comforted her and expressed my pride for her achievements, a sentiment I sincerely held true. Fast forward 2 years, Haverson Bregman was acquired by Sterling Vance Partners, a prominent New York-based firm, which brought Preston Cade into our midst. He was a 52-year-old man with silver hair, exuding an expensive and deliberate air. This individual, who wore a $400 quarter-zip sweater as if it were a uniform and parked his Porsche Cayenne exclusively in front of the building, took immediate notice of Cressida's career trajectory. Within just 4 months after the acquisition, she was promoted to senior vice president, bypassing 3 individuals who had been with the firm longer than her. I observed her transformation prior to comprehending its cause. She began working late regularly, not just the odd late night associated with finance, but almost every 3 or 4 nights, arriving home after 10, occasionally past midnight. Her work attire also evolved, not towards a more formal style, but rather towards fitted blazers and increased attention to her hairstyle before departing in the morning. I justified it by believing that Sterling Vance had stricter standards and a different culture compared to the smaller firm she initially worked at. I convinced myself of many things. The first significant indication emerged around 8 months ago, on a Tuesday in April. Having driven downtown to deliver lunch to Cressida, as she mentioned being swamped with a deadline, and not having eaten, upon reaching the Sterling Vance offices located on the 31st floor of a tower on West Wacker Drive, the receptionist, a young woman named Dahlia, informed me that Cressida had stepped out for a meeting. "Who is she with?" I inquired, more out of interest than suspicion, not yet. "She's with Mr. Cade," Dahlia replied, then seemed to realize she had disclosed too much. "They frequently engage in lunch meetings, for the Meridian account," she added. At that moment, I didn't give it much thought. I returned to my office after leaving the food with Dahlia, but the phrase, "they do that a lot," lingered at the back of my mind like an elusive splinter. Over the ensuing months, this pattern persisted. Business trips Cressida vaguely detailed, a 5-day company retreat in Scottsdale where everyone else from her team returned after 3 days, a solo attendance at Preston Cade's 50th birthday dinner, all of which she had been invited to, as per her statement, because she was now part of his inner circle. I feel compelled to be truthful about something. I harbored suspicions of an affair. A reasonable person would share the same doubts, but I never found concrete evidence. Instead, I gathered small inconsistencies over time. Cressida skillfully rationalized each one, leaving me uncertain. It wasn't until I stopped scrutinizing each incident separately and began seeing the bigger picture that I realized the true nature of our situation. However, my assumptions were incorrect. I thought it was infidelity. But what I eventually discovered far exceeded that fear. My daughter, Freya, aged 7, was the reason for my silence. I persistently convinced myself that any discord between Cressida and me, any distance that had grown, required certainty before I disrupted our daughter's life with revelations. So, I observed. I paid meticulous attention, perhaps years too late, and what I began to perceive was not only Cressida distancing herself from me, but a more profound issue brewing beneath the surface. Cressida had transformed into someone I hardly recognized, someone more sharp-tongued, someone who frequently discussed money and status, topics she had rarely touched upon before. My younger brother Desmond, who runs a contracting business in Naperville, has always been the only person in my life to tell me the unvarnished truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. Approximately 2 months prior to the holiday party, I shared with him at his kitchen table following a Sunday dinner what had been gnawing at me for months. "There's something wrong with Cress," I said. "I can't provide any proof, but there's definitely something amiss." Desmond didn't appear surprised by this revelation. "That itself was a telling sign," he responded. "If you want my genuine opinion," he added, "that woman has transformed since the arrival of Cade." Sophia had noticed it too at Thanksgiving. Cress barely looked at me throughout the entire dinner and kept glancing at her phone discreetly under the table. Sophia, who is Desmond's wife, had never before uttered a critical word about Cressida in the 6 years they had been acquainted with each other. If Sophia had observed, it wasn't within my mind. "Do you suspect she's with him?" I inquired. Desmond fell silent momentarily. "I believe you should cease questioning me and instead find the answers." This exchange lingered with me for weeks. I didn't engage a private detective. It's crucial to note this, as the narrative isn't about that. What I chose to do was less complex, yet potentially more incriminating. I became meticulous about our shared accounts, a practice I hadn't followed closely in years, for Cressida had always managed our household finances with the same diligence she applied at work. I placed absolute faith in her management of it. That was my error, or perhaps my salvation, depending on perspective. What I uncovered in October, while scrutinizing 6 months' worth of statements on our joint credit card, wasn't proof of infidelity. It revealed something entirely different. 4 installments totaling nearly $11,000 were billed to a firm called Belhaven Strategic Consulting over 6 months. I had never heard of them, and neither did Cressida mention them, nor did any substantial information about the company emerge when I searched online. The only find was a minimalist website featuring a stock image of a handshake and a Chicago P.O. box as the address. I have yet to bring it up with her. I wanted to investigate first before addressing anything, and intuition hinted that this could be more than an affair, if one even existed. I contacted my cousin Priya, who specializes in forensic accounting at a downtown firm, to discuss off the record over coffee what she thought about a seemingly hollow consulting company receiving routine payments from our shared account. She was straightforward. "Alden, I noticed a pattern in 2 scenarios," she explained, methodically adding sugar to her cup, seemingly selecting each word with as much care as each spoonful. "One possibility is that it's an authentic consulting relationship, but the records are inadequate. The other option could be that it serves as a channel, money being moved where it's less traceable. This conduit might be serving various purposes. It could be embezzlement from a company account, funneled through a shell to appear legitimate. It could be kickbacks. It could also pertain to something private between them unrelated to their jobs." She scrutinized me. "You mentioned this is Cress's account as well, a joint account, both our names. Thus, she's either concealing this from you or believes you won't suspect it." I exited the coffee meeting with a trembling grasp on my cup, as $11,000 from our shared account signified she had been transferring my funds, money sourced from my company's earnings, to an unknown enterprise, Belhaven Strategic Consulting, without ever disclosing her motive. Instead of addressing the matter promptly, I decided to gather more information first, as I knew some might consider this action questionable. In my 41 years, I had learned that when one confronts someone before fully comprehending the issue, they have an opportunity to concoct a stronger deception. Therefore, I opted to uncover the true ownership of Bellhaven Strategic Consulting by enlisting Priya's assistance in reviewing public filing records. It took her approximately 2 weeks, as she completed this task during her free time due to its purposeful concealment. The findings sent a wave of realization through me, one that I didn't fully acknowledge until later. 3 years ago, Odalis Faris, now the founder of Bellhaven Strategic Consulting, was recorded as an officer in Cade Family Holdings, LLC, a company with close ties to Preston Cade, according to Illinois corporate filings. I kept this discovery to myself for 3 days before disclosing it. Even Desmond wasn't informed immediately. I needed time to understand the implications first, as the information hinted at more than just an affair between Odalis and Preston. It seemed that funds from our household, money earned through my firm, were being routed through a company linked to my wife's employer, without my knowledge or consent, for purposes I couldn't fathom. I eventually reached out to Priya again, seeking an answer to the question that had been troubling me. If someone were using a front company to transfer funds from a legitimate business without the owner's awareness, what would that activity be termed? She showed no signs of hesitation. Depending on the circumstances, this could be considered embezzlement. If it involves electronic transactions across state lines, which is common with such activities, it might activate federal wire fraud statutes. Alden, if your description aligns with my assumptions, you should consult a lawyer before anything else. I have a lawyer. Her name is Marguerite Ackafer, an attorney specializing in family law and financial litigation, who has offices within the city loop, and was highly recommended by a colleague of mine whose own divorce she had handled 2 years prior. In November, I sat in her office, presenting everything I had: credit card statements, Bellhaven filings, evidence linking Preston Cade, and observed her expression change from professional detachment to something more like keen interest. "Here's what I want you to comprehend," Marguerite explained. "If your spouse has been involved in moving misappropriated funds through your joint accounts, it creates potential liability for you too, even if you were unaware of it. The need for records detailing when you became aware of the situation and subsequent actions arises significantly, as it could potentially become a legal issue given your description." She suggested I continue to gather information discreetly, avoid confronting Cressida immediately, and document every conversation, discovery, with dates. For several weeks following her advice, it was in early December that the holiday party invitation arrived through our mailbox. Every year, Sterling Vance Partners hosted their holiday gala at Wraith Hollow Country Club in Oakbrook, an event Cressida had attended twice without me, both times offering excuses that felt weak even then. This time, she invited me. I recall being somewhat taken aback by the invitation. Standing in our kitchen with her back towards the window, she said, "I want you there," not quite meeting my gaze. "It's important this year." You were asked by Preston if you would be present at the event, to which I responded affirmatively, not for any reason related to Sterling Vance, but because Marguerite had told me weeks prior that if I ever found myself in the same room as Preston Cade, especially in a public setting with witnesses, I should seize the opportunity. I feel compelled to clarify that I did not go to the party intending to give a stranger my wedding ring in front of 200 people. My intention was to observe. However, what transpired that night was unplanned and resulted from an emotion that grew within me over approximately 90 minutes, as I watched my wife in a way I hadn't before. The Wraith Hollow Country Club is located on a vast property along York Road in Oakbrook, featuring dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a golf course dusted with early snow. The ballroom that evening bore a subdued elegance rather than the extravagance I anticipated. Strands of white fairy lights illuminated the space, while tall bouquets of white roses and eucalyptus stood proudly. A jazz trio played softly in one corner, allowing for easy conversation, as 200 guests dressed in cocktail attire mingled between bite-sized appetizers and a well-stocked bar that never seemed to have waiting lines. Cressida donned an unfamiliar deep emerald dress, a fact that spoke volumes given my familiarity with her wardrobe. Her appearance was undeniably striking, yet there was a sense she was putting on a show for an audience I didn't seem to belong to. For the initial 30 minutes, she remained close by, presenting me to colleagues whose names slipped from my mind as soon as they were spoken. Over time, like water finding its way to a drain, she moved away. I observed her repeatedly approach a group of men, with Preston Cade at the center, who were gathered by the bar. He stood there, chuckling boisterously, a sight and sound I could catch from 30 feet off. The subsequent hour's scene deserves description for it sheds light on what unfolded later. Cressida didn't merely converse with Preston Cade, she orbited around him. She playfully touched his arm during their laughter, leaned in intimately when speaking, an intimacy she hadn't displayed towards me throughout the night. At one instance, I witnessed him briefly place his hand on the small of her back, a touch that lingered beyond professional bounds, to which she didn't react by pulling away. I stayed near the room's periphery, clutching a glass of scotch I barely sipped, while watching my spouse inhabit a self I hadn't glimpsed before. And then it transpired. Approaching her with my drink, I intended to join the ongoing conversation nearby. As I neared, an instinct instilled by 9 years of marriage prompted me to place my hand on her lower back as was customary for us at such events. However, she swiftly pushed my hand away, a firm action that even caught the attention of a passing woman. "Don't," Cressida stated crisply, her voice carrying enough to reach several listeners. "It gives the impression that I am inaccessible." For a moment that seemed longer than reality, Preston Cade remained unfazed. He continued discussing a golf trip with the man next to him, oblivious to the fact that his wife had just hinted at his inappropriate behavior in front of her colleagues, implying she was intentionally managing her availability for the night. In that instant, I felt a sense of clarity, harsh and complete, akin to when someone receives a diagnosis that explains months of mysterious symptoms. All the odd absences, late nights, vague explanations, money channeled through Belhaven Strategic Consulting, everything made sense in a single, coherent picture, vividly presented before me in an emerald dress. I chose not to confront her then, not just yet. Instead, I removed my wedding ring from my finger, the simple platinum band we'd chosen together at a jewelry store in Lincoln Park 9 years ago, and headed straight for Preston Cade. The crowd hushed as I neared, a common occurrence when an event seems imminent that doesn't align with the relaxed ambience of the night. Preston turned towards me, his rocks glass still in hand, effortlessly donning a relaxed, unperturbed grin, a smile he'd never questioned would be welcomed anywhere. I remained silent and extended my hand, placing the ring into his waiting palm. He glanced at it, his expression processing something initially perplexing, then a glimmer of recognition, followed by an inkling of comprehension as he moved towards Cressida. The smile vanished from his face, replaced with a stern, terse tone that hadn't been present all evening. "You must depart from my table." He didn't address me, instead fixing his gaze on Cressida, and the gravelly tone was unfamiliar to my ears all night long. I turned to gaze at her. Her face matched the tablecloth's hue, her mouth agape momentarily as silence filled the circle. "Preston," she began, her voice shattering on his name, revealing the genuine nature of their bond that night. "I said now, Cressida." He placed his glass firmly on the closest table with a decisive clink. "This matter is not to be discussed here." At that moment, I was yet unaware of the magnitude of the situation unfolding before me. Initially, I believed I was bearing witness to an affair's demise in real time. However, it wasn't until a late-night conversation in an unexpected parking lot that I comprehended how trivial affair was compared to the actual events taking place. Cressida snatched her small purse from the table and briskly walked towards the exit without acknowledging me, her high heels echoing against the marble floor of the entranceway, and I chose not to pursue her that night. I found myself in the midst of Preston Cade's associates, and something within me, a part that had been waiting months for approval, finally voiced its concern. "Given your presence," I stated, and my voice was more composed than anticipated, "you may wish to inquire about a company called Belhaven Strategic Consulting from Preston." The expression on Preston's face indicated I had not erred. A man next to him, appearing to be around 60, with the subtle air of authority that suggested unacknowledged seniority, looked at Preston with genuine perplexity. "Belhaven? What's he referring to, Preston?" Preston responded hastily, his jaw tightening. "I have no clue," Preston said. "That's odd," I added, as O'Dolly's Ferris seems well-informed regarding its nature. She is recorded as an officer for both Belhaven and Cade family holdings. I recalled a distinctive expression on Preston's face that would linger in my memory, a calculated panic, resembling a man rapidly calculating how much information a stranger possessed and anticipating the potential trouble in the next 30 seconds. As the older gentleman, later identified as Harold Whitfield, one of Sterling Vance's founding partners and Preston's superior, moved closer to me, his demeanor transformed from cordiality to intense focus. "Who are you really?" Harold inquired. "Alden Ray's husband of Cressida Marlowe." A flicker crossed his face, perhaps recognition of the name, or perhaps simply an understanding of the developing scenario. "Mr. Ray's," he replied. "Tomorrow morning, would you converse with me at a less bustling location?" I proposed. You agreed, provided your number, and departed Wraith Hollow Country Club singularly, apart from your spouse, uncertain about the extent of what I'd unearthed, but realizing after many months that I wasn't the only one in the room whose evening had been disrupted by a solitary wedding band. I encountered Cressida in the parking lot, huddled next to our vehicle with her arms hugging herself against the December chill, tears tracing lines down one cheek from her smeared makeup. I wish I could say I felt compassion gazing at her like that. Instead, I felt a peculiar, drained tolerance, the sensation of finally being able to voice questions I'd been suppressing for months. "Disclose the truth about Belhaven," I said, maintaining distance, keys in hand. "Every detail immediately." She remained silent for a prolonged spell, her breath visible in the frosty air. Over the following 20 minutes in the almost deserted parking lot as snow fell softly around us, it became clear that what Cressida was about to disclose wasn't a romantic betrayal. Despite having an affair, she acknowledged this casually, mentioning it as if it were of minor importance. Instead, she confessed to something far more detrimental. Preston Cade had been stealing client funds from Sterling Vance accounts for nearly 3 years. He channeled portions of these funds through a complex web of shell companies, with Belhaven Strategic Consulting being one of them, and used O'Dolly's Ferris, a former assistant, as a front to obscure his trail on paper. 18 months prior, during an audit assignment, Cressida uncovered something improper. Instead of reporting it, Preston proposed an enticing opportunity, a rapid promotion to senior vice president, a 6-figure consulting fee secretly funneled through Belhaven into their shared account, thus avoiding investigation on Sterling Vance's financial records and eventually him. "I told myself it was just this once," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But then it wasn't just one instance. Every time I considered ending it, he'd remind me I was already involved. Reporting him meant implicating myself too. So you used our account, my money, my name, to launder embezzled funds." I didn't realize that's what I was doing. "How did you view this, Cressida?" She had no response. I think she never fully considered it enough to have an answer. That night I drove home alone while she called a car. 3 days passed without any communication. Then Marguerite Ockhaffer sat opposite us both in a downtown conference room, accompanied by an attorney hastily employed by Cressida. The purpose of this meeting was to assess the true extent of her legal predicament. As promised, Harold Whitfield contacted me the next morning. The revelations from our conversation and subsequent weeks showed that Sterling Vance's internal compliance unit had identified irregularities in Preston Cade's accounts 4 months prior, but the probe had been delayed. Harold admitted this delay was partly due to Preston's influence with certain board members, which made people hesitant to act swiftly. My attendance at that party and the mention of Belhaven Strategic Consulting in front of Harold and other partners seemed to have revitalized a dormant process. Within a week, Preston Cade was placed on administrative leave. By February, after a combined investigation by Sterling Vance's external legal team and later the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Sterling was charged with wire fraud and money laundering offenses pertaining to approximately $2.3 million misused from client accounts across 3 years. Cressida's situation, however, remains a complex matter I've pondered for months. She wasn't the mastermind of the scheme. Instead, she was described by Marguerite during one of our discussions as a beneficiary who didn't control the mechanism. In practical terms, this meant she escaped the gravest accusations that Preston faced, but still lost her job at Sterling Vance, needed to collaborate extensively with federal investigators, and in the end, was compelled to return funds passed through our shared account money I had been unaware of living alongside for over a year. In January, I initiated divorce proceedings, not driven by malice, but acknowledging a dark sense of triumph seeing the disintegration of the life we once shared together. Yet I'm not here to deceive. A fraction of me reveled in this demise. I filed because, in that parking lot, as she recounted 18 months of decisions made without my involvement, it struck me that the marriage I believed in no longer existed, or perhaps hadn't for quite some time. Freya alternated her time between us during those ensuing months, and it's important to clarify that despite whatever transpired between Cressida and me, her professional actions, she remained a loving, vigilant mother to our daughter. This is not trivial, and I express this not to sugarcoat the situation, but because this narrative isn't solely about villains and victims, despite appearing as such from an external perspective. For 9 years, Cressida and I constructed a life together, though not entirely truthful, aspects of which are genuine, and separating them has been the most challenging task of my recent year. Preston Cade's trial is set for the spring. Harold Whitfield contacted me in February, stating that Sterling Vance's board had instituted stricter compliance measures following the events of that night, and they would cover the legal expenses needed to disentangle my joint accounts from the aftermath. I believe this gesture implies that regardless of other occurrences, I was not at fault. My brother Desmond occasionally brings up the incident, typically after excess alcohol during Sunday dinner, expressing disbelief that I simply handed the man a ring without uttering a word. Since December, I've frequently pondered over that instant. I believe a significant factor behind its success was its self-explanatory nature. The ring conveyed its message implicitly. It said, "You stole something from me, and I recognize exactly what it looked like. I won't stand here feigning ignorance." I purchased a townhouse in Evanston in March, conveniently located near Freya's school to minimize the impact on her schedule. Cressida relocated to an apartment close to Lincoln Square, and our relationship has taken on a professional dynamic primarily centered around our daughter, maintaining a civil if not affectionate atmosphere. Whether it will ever grow warmer, I am unsure, and frankly, I no longer yearn for that. There exists a narrative in which I portray Cressida as a villain, where the affair serves as the central plot, allowing me to embody the role of the wronged spouse. However, the reality is more intricate than that, and I believe this complexity is what makes it worth sharing. Cressida did not intentionally transform into someone who funneled money through her family's finances. Gradually, she found herself entangled in a series of compromised choices, each leading to the next, until she stood in a ballroom, telling her husband that his touch on her back made her appear unapproachable. Nowadays, I often ponder over that night at Wraith Hollow excessively. Not so much the argument itself, but the 30 minutes preceding it, where I watched my wife dance around another man, feeling like an outsider instead of her husband of 9 years. I reflect upon how long I might have continued observing, justifying my actions, had she not pushed my hand away in public. Sometimes the most painful experiences are the ones that save you, as they're the hardest to rationalize. If there's anything I wish someone watching this to grasp, it's this lesson. Focus on the pattern rather than isolated incidents. Each peculiar occurrence, late communication, or defensive response can be rationalized individually. It's only when you take a step back and scrutinize the overall picture, as I did with my credit card bills spread across the kitchen table in October, that the truth becomes evident and hard to ignore. Freya posed a question out of the blue during our pancake-making session on a Saturday morning a few weeks ago. Would Mommy and I get married again someday? I told her no, my dear, such unions don't function like that, but both her parents cherished her above everything else, and that love would remain constant regardless of the house she was sleeping in each night. She accepted this explanation, typical of 7-year-olds, and returned to discussing adding chocolate chips to the mix. After Preston's trial ends, I'm unsure about Cressida's fate. It remains unclear if Sterling Vance's culture genuinely transforms as Harold Whitfield claimed, or if men like Preston Cade are merely replaced by others, eager to manipulate those around them into beings lesser than themselves. What I am certain of is that I entered that ballroom in December, still harboring a sliver of hope I was mistaken about my findings, and emerged with a comprehension I hadn't experienced in over a year. Often that's the only kind of resolution one receives. Not justice, not quite, not a neatly wrapped closure. Just understanding, and eventually, the freedom to cease questioning someone else for explaining something you intuitively grasped long ago before being furnished with irrefutable evidence. Surprisingly, it's not even the ring moment that lingers in my memory. For some time, Alden rationalized one thing after another before he acknowledged the underlying pattern. I believe this is a habit we all share. We focus on minor details, piece by piece, and talk ourselves out of recognizing the big picture since it can be intimidating, but our instincts often grasp it before our minds acknowledge it. If something has been troubling you recently, Perhaps stop justifying it. Feel free to share your experiences in the comments if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation. And if you're new here, consider subscribing as we have plenty more of these insights to come.